Huh. Okay. Sorry about that. What can you do? I guess we've got, what, 15 minutes left?
Yeah.
13.
13. Okay. I'll keep it brief. So this is where we kind of left off in terms of kin selection. And this is the kind of super kin selection, right? Eusociality with haplodiploid mating system. And so these are a colony of bees, but there's a lot of similar species in terms of bees and wasps and ants. There's a separation of castes, so there's usually only one queen. There's a drone, well, a number of drones, and then all the workers. And unlike termite, well, some other species actually have different kinds of workers in terms of size, like some have soldiers and stuff. With this, all of them do the same jobs, except that they kind of cycle through them from the time they're young until they're kind of old. Now haploid diploid means that the queen makes a direct development of a haploid egg, which then turns into a drone. Okay? So, identical to her, he's haploid. And then he mates with a queen, and that's how you get what is called full sisters, which is 0.75. So the workers are 75% related to each other, whereas if they actually went off and had their own brood, they would only be 50%. Okay? Plus, the queen generally releases a pheromone that stops any other worker, female worker, from trying to breed. Okay, so in this case, this is where kin selection really plays out. Okay. This is ancestral monogamy. In other words, a queen and I guess a male was ancestral. Okay, and it's actually in this kind of thing, female mating frequencies in 267 species of eusocial bees, wasps, and ants. Mating with a single male, which maximizes relatedness and is ancestral to all 8 independent eusocial lineages. So one thing that's interesting is that this has kind of arisen a number of different times. High polyandry. In this case, more than 2 effective males and then 1 female. So polyandry is where there's a female and she mates with many males. And this occurs in only lineages whose workers have lost reproductive totipotency. In other words, they can't breed. Monandry was critical in evolution of eusociality, strongly supporting the prediction of inclusive fitness theory. Okay, and then let's take a look at this. Okay, so Okay, so anyway, let's see what we got here. We've got males with females with greater than 2 males. Okay, so you can see places like this. Um, in this case, probably the ancestor for this group. um, you have different lineages, but then here's another one for this group that's independent, and this group independent. So you can see that it's actually happened quite a number of different times. Okay. Now, in terms of relatedness in humans, well, it apparently matters. This graph looks at. Okay. Children who live with a step-parent are actually at much higher risk of abuse and physical abuse and injury than with their own actual biological parents. Which, seems kind of. Now, I want to make sure that you understand that not all stepfathers are bad. It's just that the incidence in which they injure their stepchildren is much higher than actually what they would do with their own children. Okay? Now, they don't necessarily know why they're doing this, except they just get angry, I guess. But there's a huge effect. So if you look at biological parents, and this is the rate of victims in millions of child years, right? And then the ages, and it's much more likely. And of course, we've got all these stories like Cinderella. Is it a classic example of being brought up by an evil step-parent, in this case a mother. And of course, luckily she gets the last laugh, right? But usually that's not the case. So it's still, there's still probably a very low incidence of this kind of stuff going on, but it's still substantially more with a step-parent. So we've been dealing with essentially with some relatedness explanations. Okay, this is all kin selection. But then there's also the kind of reciprocal altruism that Robert Trivers, proposed. And reciprocal altruism, it's, if I scratch your back, you'll scratch mine. It's basically cooperation, but at different time periods. Okay? So we actually think about it in space-time, the same thing. And altruistic acts are performed because there's an expectation, of course, that is reciprocated. Now, if you're a dominant structure, and let's say you have a dominant male, that may not be reciprocal grooming, because he might not do anything except just lay there, right? Getting groomed by the females and subdominant males and stuff. Okay. So here we are again. And in terms of altruistic acts, now in our society, I guess we do kind of have. Sorry, my voice is kind of going. Okay, Okay, so in human society, we have all these different interactions with people. Now we do have some what we would call, let's say, behavioral phenotypes, right? The classic sociopath. All you have to do is watch Othello by Shakespeare, and you see, a sociopath in Iago. He's magnificent actually in the way he manipulates people around them. But a lot of human beings will generally interact more favorably with people they know, or with relatives, something like that, than they will with complete strangers until they get to know them, or they find out that they're dealing with a sociopath eventually, and then they decide not to, hang out with him anymore. Okay? So, and there's probably all of us, I guess there's a test that you can do to see if you're a sociopath. This guy in Canada developed it. And unfortunately, he developed it for, research. But unfortunately, a lot of police departments and DA's offices have used it. And they're really not cut out, or they don't have enough training to use it. And so, it turns out that if you had someone who's not part of law enforcement, and then someone who is, and they gave this test to some supposed criminal to see if he's a sociopath or not, one would probably get a yes answer. The other might get a yes answer or might get a no answer, right? It's not been used properly. Of course, police, criminal forensics and all that kind of stuff, it's a mess. They call it a science, but it's not at all. It's really terrible. At least they got DNA stuff now, but all these other stuff that they had. So, anyway, that's an example. But most people, we don't always act in the nicest way. Okay? Even the nicest people will at least have bad thoughts, right? Like, God, I want to kill them. But in general, we don't always tell the truth. Now, sometimes we don't tell the truth because, well, let's say we're with our spouse or something, and if we really spoke everything that we think, well, you couldn't go on in life. It'd be impossible. You'd be telling truths that would get people angry at you all the time, even if it is the truth, right? So you don't want to hurt their feelings. And so we're well aware of our social environment surrounding us. So in terms of triggers, is it friendship, dislike, or moralistic aggression, gratitude, sympathy, trust, suspicion, trustworthiness, aspects of guilt, some forms of dishonesty and hypocrisy can be explained as important adaptations to kind of regulate altruistic systems. Namely, who you're going to be altruistic with, if you're going to be altruistic at all, right? It's, in general, most people don't go and do something to save someone else that they're strangers with. But it does happen, of course. I think there's an award by the Templeton Foundation for people, who do incredible things. But kind of like what happened on that train with the 3 American guys, and there was some other things that's been around. But anyway, and we also have to think in terms of let's see. Okay, and we have to think in terms of sometimes an act may appear to be altruistic. And we've already dealt with this a little bit, like where birds feeding other birds, and it's really not altruism, it's actually a dominance hierarchy. And they're showing, in fact, that they're better than the other ones. Oh, God, we're done. Okay. What can I say? Okay, so here's Robert Trivers again. And probably one of the great evolutionary biologists in the 20th century, well, and now too. He is crazy. He ends up in the hospital all the time because he's bipolar. He's not brilliant because he's crazy. He just happens to be crazy. But he gets a, it's interesting. He gets a lot of his ideas from feelings that he has, because he realizes that he's an animal, and that as an animal, he can probably relate to other animals. Most people think, well, we're not really like other animals. Well, anyway, that's debatable. And he's especially, he's done some stuff on sexual selection, but a lot on social systems. And people's different agendas. So we've all got agendas. Now, I talked a little bit about behavioral phenotypes, like a sociopath. But mostly, people are along the spectrum. And will act certain ways under some circumstances with people, let's say, that we don't know as well versus people that we do. Some of us might even, it's just like, there's something free, I'll just steal it. It's no big deal or whatever. But it's definitely, it's not like, you're a sociopath or you're not. Okay, so from his point of view, is that all these different things, gratitude, sympathy, trust, trustworthiness, aspects of guilt, forms of dishonesty and hypocrisy can be explained as important adaptations to regulate altruistic systems. In other words, if there's altruism, or looks like altruism, there's always going to possibly be a free rider problem, and how do individuals actually deal with that problem? Okay? So each individual human is seen as possessing altruistic and cheating tendencies, the expression of which is sensitive to developmental variables that were selected to set the tendencies at a certain balance. So just remember about the cleaner fishes, right? When they could, they cheated, but they were recognized as cheaters, and so the fish that, let's say, got a chunk taken out of them, that fish wasn't too happy anymore. They might have chased them, might have refused to, I'll go to another station. I don't need to deal with you, right? Okay. And then, of course, he came up with a reciprocal altruism, which is, I guess it's altruism, kind of. It's more cooperation, but in time. But he was still interested in how people actually cooperate and perhaps act altruistically. In other words, they give up a little bit of their fitness for the benefit of another. Sometimes they give up a lot of their fitness for the benefit of another. You think about 9/11 and all the firefighters that went into the towers and didn't come out. Now, there were other things going on there as well. First of all, if a firefighter, there's a lot of, if you're part of a group, there are certain things that, ways to behave that are kind of like set in stone. I was listening to this tape about this guy in World War II. in the Pacific, and he was in some of the worst. I mean, absolutely. It's surprising he didn't go absolutely crazy. But anyway, the driving force, in terms of not cutting and running, well, you couldn't get off the island anyway, so it didn't matter, but was not letting your buddies down. That was such a strong feeling that almost no one would break that. Even if they cracked up entirely, they will not let their buddies down. So, in terms of, let's say, motivation with the 9/11 firefighters and policemen and stuff that died, there was probably a lot of that going on. It still resulted in altruism. They saved a lot of people, right? But they gave up, in this case, they gave up all their fitness for essentially strangers. So there's a bunch of different kinds of examples. Political action committees, barn building in rural societies. Still happens, by the way. A friend of mine's going to be building a new barn that was wiped out in a fire, a rim fire. So anybody who wants to join in, I'll let you know. Probably next spring we'll start building it. Obviously helping in times of danger, sharing food, sick and wounded, sharing tools, sharing knowledge, right? A lot of that is more like cooperation in terms of, is it really lowering your own fit? And then here we are with, but the prisoner's dilemma, remember, was a one-time game. And the winning strategy was to desert, in other words, turn your buddy in. It wasn't so much that you wanted to turn your buddy in, it was that you had to protect yourself from the worst possible outcome, and that is your buddy turns you in and you cooperate, supposedly with your buddy, and you end up with 20 years in prison, okay? But this is basically the repeated prisoner's dilemma game. Goes on and on and on and on. A lot, kind of like what we do when we interact with people all the time. Now, and the idea is, you do what your partner did in the previous move. Okay? So if your partner cooperated with you, you cooperate. If your partner whacked you, turned you in, then that's what you did. Okay? And you can actually get a payoff where cooperate actually wins. So let's take a look at this. Okay. Single prisoner's dilemma, remember, you defect is the highest possible score, and it protects you from the worst, right? If you cooperate, of course, with this guy over here, you're dead because he's turned you in. Okay. Now, tit for tat is different. Instead of cooperating, we'll say it's actually tit for tat. You do what your partner does. If your partner tit for tat, then you do tit for tat. If partner defects, then you defect. The thing here is that there's no temptation, as long as it's a continuous game, there's no real temptation to defect. Okay? In other words, turn your partner in. It's only when you have a limited number of prisoner dilemma games, whether it's a one-time or 100 times, but there's going to be an end, that it's actually not good to do tit for tat. In general, it is, and it mostly results in cooperation. And we do this kind of all the time. It's called reputation. You know who you can rely on, you know? Obviously, people who you really know closely, you can rely on, unless you know them so closely that you know that they're schmucks, right? And then, of course, the hell with them, whether they're kin or not, right? But what we tend to do is we tend to interact with people that we trust, and not people that we don't trust. That's why previous to this age, when people didn't travel around, they lived with their in-laws and they lived with their relatives all the time. It was mainly the people you could trust were your relatives, and then there's kin selection coming in. But nowadays, we interact. It's just kind of astounding because it's never really happened in the past. We interact with people, strangers, all the time. Just like you and I are interacting right now, Now, in the old days, you would have tried to kill me, okay? So, maybe you still will, but we'll see. Okay. And then, what I call apparent altruism. Now, remember, altruism, you give up some of your fitness to help another individual. That means you're lowering your own fitness, okay? And a lot of times what looks like altruism isn't. Now, like the firefighters who died, the ones who survived are firefighters who go in and risk their lives. They tend to get a good reputation, and in fact it helps their status, right? Whether that actually translates into more kids or whatever, but you can see how that might happen. But a lot of stuff looks like apparent altruism, or looks like altruism isn't really. It's like policing. If everybody, I was saying, the worst thing you could do if you were in a platoon in World War II, or any war for that matter, you didn't want to let your buddies down. And that was the biggest fear anybody had. They were terrified of letting their buddies down. Now, it's almost kind of like self-policing in that regard. Because even if you survived, you would probably, unless you were, a sociopath, you'd die of guilt or whatever. Okay. Now, and then there's dominance hierarchies, it looks like everybody's getting along just fine, and it's actually dominance hierarchies, or there's status. Individuals have higher status. Those high status individuals, in the handicap principle, can actually afford to do things for other members that apparently lowers their fitness, but they have so many resources they can actually afford it. So, philanthropy, gift giving, group defense, like they've never really proven this, but when females, let's say lions go to fight an intruder, let's say a hyena or something like that, it's usually the highest status female that does it. It's kind of a wonder that, and also it's kind of a wonder that the individual who's least likely doesn't get punished. So it's a bit of kind of a dilemma. Reputation. Now, we've talked mainly about individual effects on fitness here. But if you have a situation, now remember, if you don't prevent free riders, even if the group competes better with other groups, it'll still all become selfish individuals, okay? But once you meet, you have a group that's kind of functioning, it's kind of an emergent property, what we call it, an emergent property. So like group benefits at the individual level. Now, of course, if you're part of a group, you have social cohesion and group stability. Now remember, in the past, if you weren't a member, let's say you were a hunter-gatherer, if you weren't part of a group, you were likely dead. Everybody, in fact, getting shunned, let's say, or tossed out was usually a death sentence. And reliable partners. So there's a whole bunch of things that you get in terms of the group that provides you with an environment that actually helps you individually. Now, it turns out you're still competing. There's some individuals in that group that are going to end up with higher status, but essentially by cooperating, everybody kind of benefits to a certain extent. And then we've got, how do we actually enhance that kind of social bonding and cooperation? Well, we do have like our emotions and feelings, the warm and fuzzies, right? I mean, that's kind of interesting. Why do we have that? Now some people don't, but a lot of people do. Some people have it more for their animals than they have for other humans, but regardless, your animals are part of your social group anyway. Oops. Oh yeah, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about this, but not much. Religion is a bit of a puzzle. A lot of times, you would think that religion would go away because the downsides, like ISIS, would be so strong that you wouldn't have any survivors left. Okay? But almost every culture that we look at, there is generally religion. Now, there's certainly always the case, there's always some sort of supernatural. We have minds that apparently, our first rationale is almost supernatural. Just think about how conspiracy theories actually start. People are more likely to believe a crazy-ass conspiracy theory than something that's actually proven scientifically. So, Dawkins came up with this idea, Richard Dawkins, about how religion might have arisen. Now remember, he hates religion. But anybody know what a meme is? You haven't heard of memes. Okay. A meme is like a gene. When we talk about evolution, we usually think about the information that's remembered is DNA. It gets passed down from one generation to the next, right? So we can actually code information in our DNA. Okay. Well, a meme is an idea, let's say, and it propagates itself. Now, really good ideas really propagate themselves. Okay? But according to Dawkins, he thinks that religion is basically a parasitic meme that is actually copying itself to more and more people. Now remember, a meme, there's certain things that it can do that evolution by natural selection can, which is you can transfer an idea from one person to the next versus always going by generation. Okay? So, a meme can actually travel much faster than kind of evolution. So you end up with what's called cultural evolution. I mean, just think about the latest fashions. Those are memes. All of a sudden, this new, what's the latest cool fashion thing? Anybody? I don't know these things. Anything?
Ripped shirts.
What?
Ripped shirts. Ripped shirts.
Huh?
Ripped shirts.
Ripped shirts? Really?
Like this one as well.
Oh, okay. So that's a meme. You know, you're trying to be cool, you have ripped shirts. But, and then, like in the 60s, there were bell bottoms. Eventually bell bottoms will come back around, right? That's a meme. Cars actually evolved because of memes. Selection works on a car by which car gets sold the most. Which, I mean, there's preferences, right? Why do you buy a car? There's a bunch of different reasons. One is the cool factor. Another is the price factor. Miles per gallon. Whole bunch of different reasons. And, you know, certain cars are like everybody wants one. Of course, everybody would like a Tesla, I think, now, but there's also the cost that's involved. So, selection, in other words, people buying something, is the same thing as essentially natural selection. Which ideas or which goods and services, which are actually ideas. So information is coded instead of DNA, it's coded into ideas, memes. Okay? Anyway, there's a whole bunch of different religion hypotheses. In other words, why is it so ubiquitous? Literally almost found among every culture. One of them is that, let's say it was adaptive in the past and it's not anymore. In fact, maybe it might be maladaptive now. It's a byproduct. So like I mentioned, our brains are really attuned to something else causing something. And so we see like eyes where there aren't any eyes. It's better to make an error of commission than of omission. Commission, you might just look like an idiot, but omission, you might be dead, right? So, and I mean, just think about people. They think about the wildest things. They believe the wild. I think that our minds are, they're certainly not rational for the most part. And in fact, I think rationality is probably way down at the bottom. Just think about, you know, social interactions actually survive beyond death. Everybody, it's like you can't get these people out of your head that, let's say, you love. And in fact, a lot of cultures actually have where they celebrate all their relatives once a year. They actually bring them out of the ground where they've been buried, not under tons of earth, but in a big hole in the ground underneath. And they take them out and they bring these bodies and they prance around with them. Okay? So it's this kind of family sort of cult. So, and just think about other animals do this. Dogs do this. When a dog's best friend dog dies, what happens? A lot of times that dog is really, really sad. Thinking about that individual. I mean, that we say, oh, you know, it's like that individual, oh, he must have a soul, he must still be somewhere. And then, of course, you know, there's group stability, but I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, okay, good.